take 2. Here begins Stave 1, Night and Storm. The Tale Weavers arrive. Winter descended with remorseless fury upon the upland villages of Wales, driven by a wind so furious that snow and freezing rain falling from scudding clouds above Cribidigzils did not touch the earth before Bitus y Code. Sorry about the Welsh pronunciation. I am Canadian. So strengthy was the storm that stones were ripped from the frid walls and cast bounding into the valleys, causing beasts to scamper, children to amaze, and men to blaspheme. It was widely preached and sometimes even believed that the puissance of the tempest was God's revenge for the rare gentle spring Wales had enjoyed the year before, as it was just and meet that the cruelest winter should follow the gentlest May. For the fates have decreed that the path of men shall lie midway between the grove of delight and the grot of despair. And the proper hue of man's lot is grey, if not of a uniform sombre colour, then compounded of whites and blacks in turn, of fortune and misfortune. To this ineluctable law of destiny there are but 2 exceptions, the lucky and the unlucky. Among the unlucky were such travellers as were caught sans harbour upon the road, and the humble cottagers who did huddle about their hearths and curse the ravenous wind that sucked the fire up the chimney before the gift of Prometheus could warm the outstretched hands and proffered foods. In all that swirling sea of chaos and misery, there was but one island of comfort, the sturdy castle of Dalbadarn, wherein 3 vast hearths did consume a forest of logs. And temper the great hall. The Baron of Dalbadarn, warrior of generous renown, before time and glutton had sapped his sinews, stood at the narrow casement, overlooking the moat. He drew his thick cape of vair more closely about him, and experienced that particular sense of well-being that attends warmth and comfort, made precious by comparison with the discomfort of others. Thus does God in his wisdom make use of the suffering of even the least of us, to enhance, by contrast, his boons upon those born to merit his favour. In this wise all things conduce to the ultimate good, though it be not given to the low-minded to comprehend the ways of heaven. But it was not alone the roaring fires in this high-vaulted hall that warmed the old baron's heart, nor yet the heavy joint that turned in the hearth, its charred fats spitting and hissing into the flames, nor yet even the knowledge that he had been blessed with a wife of beauty and appetite, who bore her 40 years with a dignity that halved them, and with a daughter of 19 summers, lusty and frick for those whose hand and favours many suitors pled. These boons he accounted the meet and proper privileges of any knight born to land and power, who had served God with high valour by bashing the Saracen Paynim in the Holy Lands. What particularly pleased the Baron was anticipation of rich and meaty storytelling this night, for the old warrior's greatest delight was in tales well told. The new cleric had been installed in the chapel, and this night would dine for the first time in the halls of Dalbadarn. The Baron rubbed his hands together and chuckled as he looked forward to entertaining stories of old cuckolds with young wives, of cunning swains and willing trulls, of bawdy nuns and sly friars. In some, to the earthy sort of tales the former priest had amused him with late in the wine, and might be telling still had he not fallen victim to unkind rumors concerning choir boys. He dearly hoped the new priest would be of the useful, deep drinking and storytelling ilk he preferred, though he harbored a niggling dread that he might turn out to be of that dour sort whose every tale had some leaden moral tacked onto the end, or who babbles on sans end or pity of saints and martyrs and such spoil sport persons. The good Baron frowned at the prospect of a dull, elevating priest. But he drew comfort from his conviction that the Saviour Christ would never punish a knight of the cross with the scourge of a pious priest. That would be unfair. And the Baron's pure, simple faith refused to admit any suggestion that God might play the part of the unsporting lout. The evening waned, and yet the new priest arrived not. The lady of the manor descended, radiant in a gown of red samite, and took her place at the table, beside their buxom, full-blooded daughter. But still the guest arrived not. The Baron's stomach growled complaint at being denied its viands, and the Baron growled back, "The joint be brent, and we attend this discourteous churl longer. To table, then, and the devil's piss upon him if he comes sniffing about here once the meal's begun." The mistress and her daughter did blush and press their lips together and tap them with their fingertips, as was their wont when the Baron's rough tongue betrayed that his wit had been honed in the company of rude and ready fellows. But for all their pretty blushing, they too felt the claws of hunger, sharpened by the heady smell of roasting meat. No sooner had the Baron seated himself and lifted a rip of meat to his moistened mouth than there came a beating at the great door. Slamming the meat upon the table with an oath, the Baron rose and strode to the portal with angry pace, muttering sincere imprecations against all such uncivil whoresons as make a practice of banging upon a man's door just when his teeth are a-tingle with anticipation. A serving man rushed to the door in advance of the master, and throwing it open with a vigor calculated to demonstrate his eagerness to serve, had the misfortune to run the oaken mass over his liege's great toe. Thus it was, when the priest entered into the hall, he was smitten by the piety of the Baron, whom he found kneeling upon the floor, beating his breast, and wailing and calling upon God in more forms and usages than were within the priest's ken. Whilst the Baron was engaged in earnestly supplicating by God's eyes, wounds, beard, and nether parts, the ladies of the hall swept forward to receive their guest, and with jolly courtesies, with civilities, they redoubled upon discovering that this man of God lacked those qualities of age and ugliness appropriate to his calling. He was, in fact, marked by youth, manly beauty, golden locks that belied his tonsure, and a body sinewy and well-made in all parts. They took from him his dripping cape, and bade him warm himself at the hearth before partaking of refreshment. The young priest did most courteously wise, and with pretty flow of words, make his apologies for late arrival, pleading the rigors of the weather and his ignorance of the way, as he had not before been guest to the manor, nor had the privilege of the company of its beautiful and gracious ornaments. Blushing and pushing at his chest with their fingers, the ladies bade him leave off excuses. Oh, so heart-glad were they that he had found his way at last, and the daughter proffered the hope that he should come to know the way well in the future, for she would fain have him no stranger to their home. And she begged him to make free with whatsoever he found to his liking. With such dulcet and flattering speech, the ladies did guide the young priest to the well-provisioned table, and made a place for him betwixt them. The good baron hobbled to the table, where he did seek to entertain his guest, asking how it came to pass that so fair and strapping a lad had been doomed to the priesthood, which commonly was the resort of dim and feeble sons, who had escaped being women by only a matter of inches, and often, it was rumored, by no more than an inch, though no offence was intended. The priest lowered his eyes and recounted modestly the custom in his family to offer up to the church the wisest of their sons, the strengthiest and the most fair, thus losing 3 sons to God in each generation, until his own, in which they were required to sacrifice but one. The daughter avowed it very pretty and pious custom indeed, and one that might with honour be followed by other clans, which seemed content to sacrifice to God only the lees and dregs, the runts of the litter, as it were. And beneath the table she touched the man's hand, and finding it still afrost, placed it in the warmth of her lap, as a gesture of love for all God's creatures. The young man smiled upon her with gentle grace, accepting the kindness in the spirit in which it was given. "Well then," declared the baron, "to meat, and famine take the hindmost. And after you've had your gorge, white priest, we shall try whether thou hast sleight of tongue in storytelling to lighten the evening hours." So saying, the old knight lifted a dripping morsel with his fingers, and was on the instant of letting it plop into his upturned mouth, when there came an eerie scritching at the great door. "What now?" roared the baron, flinging his meat across the room in fury. He rose with a snarl and hobbled across the hall to the door, where he was met by the serpent. "And thou open'st that door upon my toe again," promised the baron. "The dogs will break their fast upon thine arse." Cringing and muttering apologies, the serving man slid open a spy-hole artfully emplaced in the great door, whereunto he set his eye and peer out into the dark and storm. "Well, man," demanded the baron, "what is it that scritches thus eerily upon the door?" The servant closed the spy-hole and wiped the rain from his eye. "'Tis a hag, your lordship." "A hag? A hag? What sort of hag, for the love of Jesu?" Again the servant set his eye to the hole. "Well, sire, I would describe her as your ordinary run of hags, such as might be seen begging in the marketplace of any small to middling town. 'Tis a hag whose face is confected of the most part of wrinkles and furrows, whose nose is a bony hook, whose eyes are beady and sunken, and whose thin-lipped mouth might be said to be innocent of teeth, were it not for one fang that dangles from the centre top." "There! Let me see!" The baron pushed the serving man aside and set his own eye to the spy-hole. "Aye, thou hast the right of it. 'Tis a hag, to be sure. But thou hast omitted to mention that her pate is bald, save for a dizain of hairs that dangle wetly into her face, nor didst thou note the black whisker that sprouts from the wart decorating her nose." The servant begged leave to peer again through the hole, where he did close one eye and bulge the other. "Truly, sire, I did overlook those adjuncts to her ugliness, but even you, master, have failed to limn the long and bony frame revealed by the clinging of her sodden garment, and unrelieved by the usual upper adornments of womanhood, lest those be those limp entrails that dangle listlessly to her belly." "Be not forward, base person. I had noted those graces thou describest, but I wot them to merit no mention, as they fall well within every man's vision of a hag, and therefore said unsaid. But enough of this entertainment. To table!" And so saying, the Baron betook himself to the feasting boards, where he found the sturdy priest in close and civil parlance with the ladies. "Come, young man," commanded the Baron, "leave off these unmaskly niceties and tuck in, nor abuse a good gorging with the womanly affectations lately introduced from France. I do not hold with such pingling dainties as the sucking of the fingers betwixt rips of meat. Come, man, fall to with vigor, and for God's sake use both hands." "Nay, father," said the daughter, squirming and quetching, "the good priest has no need to use both hands, as he does wondrously well and skillfully with but one." Seeking to delight his senses with the teasing of them, the Baron eyed his meat long and longingly, sniffing its savor and clicking his teeth together in anticipation of the excellent work before them. With luxurious slowness, he raised the morsel to his moistening mouth, but again came the scritching at the door, somewhat more insistent than before. The Baron was wood wroth as he sent wine cups and serving platters crashing against the walls, and kicked dogs yelping to the corners of the great hall. "What in God's name is it now?" he thundered. Cringing, the serving man begged leave to opine that it might be the hag, still begging entrance to the hall and shelter from the cruel elements. "What? What?" cried the Baron. "What need have I for a hag? What caitiffade is this? Does she consider no one's feelings but her own? Take some hearty lads to the parapet, and drop a stone or two upon her head for a nuisance. Snatch up the drawbridge and mash her against the door like a fly swatted upon the table with a neighbour's joint of meat. Wring her head from her scraggy neck and cram it up her cull, that she have a lesson in manners. Grasp her brittle legs and pull them apart, first making a wish in these and other ways of your own contrivance. Teach the bitch manners ere I lose my temper." Their Baron returned to table, and begging his guests' pardon for these interruptions, declaring them laid in behalf of the hag, saying that God's commandments behoove us to care for even the least of his flock. By argument and sleight of logic, the priest did persuade towards recreation of the hag, that there might be something to attract the Baron's notice, lest he ken what he had privily in hand. Grudgingly, the Baron commanded that the hag be granted entrance, and permitted to cower in a distant corner of the hall. Then it occurred to him that the priest, being lately arrived to the village, and perhaps not cognizant of the Baron's repute for kindliness, might not know him to be as Christian as the next man or priest, so he further ordered that the hag be given a pot of gruel to allay her hunger and a stout stick to keep the dogs at bay. These acts of charity done, the Baron betook himself again to table, where, with mistrustful eye upon the door, he did thrice make a pretence, as though he would eat, hoping to foil ironic fortune that seemed bent upon interrupting his feasting. Finding these baits untaken, he perceived himself free at last to wage fine combat amongst the viands, and did therefore take up his meat and offer to set his teeth thereunto. But his wife grasped his arm in the very action of biting, and the morsel slapped his right eye smartly. "Hush," said the wife, her voice strangled with fright. "Hearest thou that?" "Hear I what?" demanded the Baron, grinding his teeth, and keeping but slack rein on his temper. "It meseemeth I heard a moaning beyond the door." "'Tis but the wind, good wife. Think no more on it, and grant me leave to gorge." "But nay," insisted the wife, grasping his arm again and setting the meat to his ear. "'Tis other than the wind I hear. 'Tis a right mournful sound, such as maidens make at the moment of completion." and thou quietest not thy grip upon my arm, good wife, thou shalt surely have this joint across thy fair and beauteous face, promised the Baron. Nay, husband, nay, let not thy manly wrath becloud thy reason. Do but try the truth of my fears, and thou shalt know I mistake me not. Prithee, be not a churlish lout in this, nor yet a brainless ass, as I would not have our guest mistake thee for a misbegotten whoreson and a brutish shit. So gently and with such tones of loving grace did the wife say this that the Baron relented and consented to her wish. And for the third time that night he did open the great oaken door and peer out against the wind-harried rain. What's this? Some lone knave of the village hath made bold to leave on our threshold a pile of filthy rags, the stench of which is wondrous noxious, though it be mixed with this brisk wind that doth chill me to the very marrow, and make me wish with all my soul that this door before me were closed. Art thou sure it be not but a filthy and reeking pile of rags? Called out the wife, for still do I hear an unearthly moaning. Ah, as to that, fair wife, the mystery is quickly solved. 'Tis this heap of scrofulous rags that does moan from time to time, each moaning accompanied by a feeble movement thereof. So saying, the Baron closed the great door and yode him to the wide hearth, where to the fire he did proffer first his hands, then his fud, that some of the chill might be drawn therefrom. Pray leave off the unseemly rubbing of thine arse, husband, begged the mistress, and give over thy bootless ramblings about the hall, lest our guest mistake thine absence from table for a gesture of inhospitality. For now that the feasting be nearly done, we should take a cup of wine and pray the good priest to entertain us with pious and illuminating tales. What? The Baron cried. Call you the feasting nearly done when I have yet to set tooth to meat? Where's the justice in that? Yet he drew some consolation from the anticipation of entertainment, for next to wine and food he took greatest delight in stories of low adventure and high valor, in rude tales and glorious. Most of all he did love tales that made him laugh, particularly those of cuckolded husbands, whom he held in deepest ridicule, and stories of maidens falling deep and well before the very eyes of befuddled fathers, whom he also held in scorn. Ay, said the Baron, do let us have a tale or two, lest this evening come to no account at all. But thou, my daughter, had best take thee to thy chamber, not alone, because I hope the stories will be of meat and matter unfit for maiden ears, but also because I ween thou art ill and on the veriest verge of some dire malady. For often again has the blood come to thy cheeks, and thy breath come in gasps, and I did even hear thee moan low upon 2 occasions. As the priest quickly withdrew his hand from her lap, the daughter pled, Nay, father, banish me not above, gramercy for thy kind solicitude. But thou dost dare to think me ill. The colour that mounted to my cheeks was but the blush of maidenhood when I bethought me that the beef turning upon yon spit, all unclothed, might in life have been a male. The gasping and panting that did but derive from the pity I felt for yon unfortunate misshapen, ugly, low and loathsome and scurvy hag, who, though she be vile and disgusting, is no less one of God's creatures and deserving of our concern. As to the moaning, it issued not from me, but rather from the pile of reeking rags you yourself did discover beyond the great door. And when in pretty fatherly care thou fearest lest the stories of this priest might be unfit for maiden ears, thou dost the pious man injustice, for I trust he knows none but the saintly and instructive tales. And with this she smiled upon the young cleric, took his hand and replaced it into her lap. "Dreadest thou so?" mused the aged knight with a frown. "I fear thou mayest have the right of it. And his tales be not but arid and moral laden. Tell me, lad, what stories have ye conned for the amusement of such noble lords as offer you feasting, though they themselves have scarce found time to shove a morsel down their own gullets?" The handsome cleric smiled modestly upon the ladies as he averred that, although he claimed no great sleight in the telling of tales, he had indeed rehearsed a story or two that he hoped they might not find totally lacking in merit. "Wouldst thou, sire, be informed of the dire, glorious, and right sad death and martyrdom of Saint Sebastian?" The Baron's face fell. "Oh, that one. The fellow with the arrows sticking out of him, and his eyes upturned as though to admonish a bird that hath shat upon his pate. With all courtesy, good priest, I confess that I like not that tale. 80 times have I heard it, and still I fail to see the humour in it." The Baron's expression took on a look of sly connivance as he pushed the priest's arm with his elbow. "Come, lad, couldst thou not instead weave a tale of a burgher's wife who put horns on the old fool by sporting with an apprentice, eh? A fair lesson it would be for us to know the ungodly ways of townsfolk, and we would study to avoid their errors and save our souls." "Truly I know of no such histories, my good lord." "Shit," muttered the Baron earnestly. "But if thou wouldst, I might regale thee with telling of the ecstasy some saints have known when the Spirit of God entered them." "Oh, do," cried the daughter. "Do let us hear of ecstasies." "Nay, nay," grumbled the Baron. "If your lore be limited to the doings of saints, at least let us hear of Saint Michael. Now there is a jolly saint, and a knight to boot, which was more than that thy Saint Sebastian can claim, he who lacked the good sense to hide behind a tree when they were shooting arrows at him. Damned fool. Though I say it with no disrespect. Tell us, I prithee, how Saint Michael grappled with the foul dragon. Describe how that fire-belching beast was wont to take off maidens and have his way with them, and feel free to limn these doings with close detail. Then look ye, picture for us the good knight's combat, how he did chop off the monster's manhood and club him with it. That's the good bit. Then recount how the knight did reach down the beast's throat, grasp his tail, and with a whip of his mighty arm did snap the dragon inside out that he might kick his flood from within." The Baron's eyes glowed as he drew his chair close to the priest's and rubbed his hands together. Aye. Tell us of such uplifting things as these." "Truly, sire," protested the clerk, "although I am well acquainted with the tale of St. Michael, I wot not such incidents as you describe." The old knight frowned. "But I got the tale from the old priest that had the living before you." "A goodly man," added the Baron, cocking a meaningful eye at the priest. "And one who knew how to spin a lively tale to earn his found and fodder, which is more than can be said for some, if you catch the subtle drift of my meaning there." The wily priest bethought himself to view the parley away from himself and towards other matters. There is a wonderment that has troubled me for some small time, sire." "Aye? And what be that?" asked the Baron. "I am but newly familiar with these parts." "Why dost thou snicker, daughter?" demanded the Baron. "Pray do not show bad breeding by interrupting the good man when he may be on the verge of telling us something entertaining. Seems it not strange to you that a pile of rags, however filthy and reeking, would have the power to moan and move?" The Baron pondered this, his brow furrowed with the effort. Now I think on it, 'tis somewhat odd. What make you of it? Truly, sire, I know not what the interpretation to place upon the thing, save it be a sign from heaven, commanding you ever to persist in your hospitality to his anointed servants. The miracle of the rags? Asked the Baron, his voice awful. Oh, as to it being a miracle, sire, I could not make so bold as to attest to that. For mark ye, the priest said, his voice low and hollow, there be other forces than those of heaven abroad on a stormy night. How? Cried the mistress of the manor. Thinkest thou this might be the work of the devil? In her fright she grasped the young man's free hand and clutched it to her breast. Thus delightfully crucified, the cleric pursued. With no more evidence than now in hand, I dare not claim the one or the other. The Baron rose. I'll put an end to this speculation, by God. I shall test the pile of rags. If it be a God-sent miracle, I shall do prayer and obeisance. If it be an incubus of the devil disguised as a heap of mouldering rags, I'll kick its fud down the road. One way or the other, I must be satisfied. And so must I, cried the daughter. And so must I, cried the wife. Steeling himself to face again the angry elements, the old knight crossed the hall and flung open the great door. The reek of the rags drove him back several paces, but summoning his courage, he advanced and prodded the heap with his sword. It stirred and moaned. In her fright, the mistress kneaded the priest's hand against her breasts. Again and again the knight prodded the pile of stenchy rags with his sword, each prod rewarded by movements that grew to palpable twitchings and squirms as the moans grew into cries and yelps. At last the Baron made so bold as to catch a bit of rag upon the point of his sword and lift it that he might peek beneath. His laughter filled the hall. "'Tis neither angel nor demon after all," he cried. "'Tis but a scrawny and disgusting beggar, who seems to have small wounds all about his body. Marks of some dread disease, I doubt me not." And with that he closed the great door and returned into the room, laughing heartily at their mistaking a humble clapper-dudgeon for the agent of God. "That's a good one on us," he declared. "But are you not going to grant him harbor from the storm?" asked the priest, remembering his Christian duty. Maugre considerable drains on his attention. "Is it not enough that I have fouled our chambers with yonder hag?" asked the Baron. "If I drag in this reeking sack of bones, I fear the dogs may bite him and fall ill." But seeing that both his wife and daughter did squirm with anguishes of pity for the poor creature, the knight relented. "Oh, very well. Have the whoreson in. But he must leave his festering rags without, for the stench of them doth make mine eyes to burn." Then he directed his servants to take up tongs and strip the beggar naked before chucking him into the corner of a hall. And they were cautioned to select a corner well away from that in which the hag growled, lest these unclean two fall upon one another in dismal lust. For it was the Baron's belief that from the mating of such as these did derive those dreadful grotesques that peer down from the eaves of the cathedrals. Upon returning to the table, the Baron sighed and shook his head. "'Tis a great pity, young priest, that our festivities are diminished by your want of stories with which to regale us. But perchance all is not lost. Though thou art dully void of lusty tales of combat in the lists and on the lits, and I would gag to hear such dour tales of saintliness as thou canst. Yet might we find pretty compromise in the oft-told tales of ancient Arthur and his knights of the Table Round. True, these tales have been spoke and heard again and again till they are beyond surprise and wonder. Yet They be worn so smooth with the telling and retelling of them that they do sometimes slip through the memory. So it is that, for all their sere and hoary age, they will serve when nothing better there is. Good sire, replied the priest, I would not deny thine urging, but tristly I know not of the tales which thou speakest, but I promise to study to improve myself in this particular, for it is my strongest desire to satisfy each and every member of this noble family. The mistress of the manor squeezed his hand and threw it her booby, and she giggled, and the daughter smiled behind her hand. What's this? Demanded the baron. Is there some amusement abroad that has escaped my ken? Why gigglest thou, wife? Wherefore smilest thou, daughter? And thou, priest? Whence these winks and snickers? Is every one to be entertained but me? Where's the justice in that, pray tell? Nay, good husband, said the wife. Thou art amiss to assume that we share any jest and keep it from thee. But she laughed aloud, though she sought to suppress it, and the daughter stretched her face bland, though her eyes sparkled with merriment. The baron frowned deeply. I'll not have amusement in the hall, lest I be a part of it. Do you hear? I must know the spring and source of all these giggles and smiles and winks and snickers. Well, priest, come, out with it. But as the priest fumbled for words, a loud and inhuman moan filled the great hall. What in the name of God's groin was that? Demanded the knight. The serving man came forward and said, 'Tis the naked wretch you lately gave comfort and shelter to, sire, that dares to moan and greed so discourteously. But why? Are the dogs at his leg? Nay, sire, there's not meat enough there to command their interest. Then require the shitten whoreson to leave off his damn moaning, and to inspire him to take the advice to heart, take up something large and bash him smartly and often. The servants did as their master bade, and for some duration they plied the old beggar's back and head with such stabs and bits of ironmongery as came easily to hand. But this instruction seemed more to increase than diminish his complaints. Devil take the bony bastard, the baron raged. This is what comes of bringing such rubbish from the storm, and granting it the hospitality of our home. Give 'em an inch, and they'll take an ell, and that's the truth of it. Drag the ungrateful clapperdudgeon before me, that he may answer to my wrath. But sire, remonstrated the servant, is it proper to bring the scroff into the presence of ladies, bare of arse and pissant as he is? Thou hast a delicate sensibility for one of your low quality. It would indeed be discourteous to drag him up in all his naked wretchedness, particularly as the ladies have but recently done with eating. Tell you what, clap a cheese rind over his dangling bits and tie it off behind. As for his arse, require him on pain of beating to stand so as to direct it away from the ladies' scrutiny. All was done as the baron ordered, and in a short time the emaciated old beggar stood before the table, quivering with cold and all naked save for his cheese rind. Full ugly the wretch was, a vision to make strong wenches miscarry, and in no wise had his appearance been improved by the probing of the baron's sword, nor indeed by the attentions of the servants with their sticks and bits of ironmongery. The ladies did gag and turn their faces away, and one old dog howled and fell swooning upon the reeds. How's this? Cried the baron. Dare you still to moan, thou impudent glob of horse spittle? The baron raised his sunken eyes to the knight. The beggar raised his sunken eyes to the knight, and opened his mouth as though to speak. Displaying teeth as nicely castellated as any manor wall, but no speech issued forth, but rather a sound compounded of sobbing, moaning, and whimpering. "Speak up, you festering pile of rat shit," the Baron urged. At last, with trembling effort, the beggar managed to utter, "Why me?" "I me?" asked the Baron. "After all this disturbance, all you can say for yourself is, 'I, me?' You'd best do better than that, and you would keep bowels and brawn in the same country." Summoning forth all his strength, the old beggar croaked, "'Tis the irony of it, good my lord." "Of what irony croakest thou?" Great tears dripped from the dim and sunken eyes as the beggar said, "To think that these ladies turn their faces from me in disgust, where once every maiden in England did smile upon me and beg that I carry her favor into single combat." "Thou?" questioned the Baron. "In single combat? With what? A flea?" The ancient wretch groaned and continued, "Ah, what bitter fate to find myself cast into the corner of the hall, where once I held sway over 7x7 castles, the least of which would not use this place to house the servants' privy." "Privy? Privy?" "To think that I starve, with not a crust to keep my belly from spine, where once I commanded such feastings as would make these viands, by comparison, naught but what I threw to the lesser of my dogs." In taut silence the Baron leaned forward, his eyes bulging with rage. Then he said in a level voice, "Enjoy this speech of thine richly, foul scruff, for surely it will be thy last." But the beggar ignored the sage advice. "For years have I borne my misery with good grace and without complaint. But this evening, hearing you speak of good King Arthur and his worthy knights, my heart did crack, and perhaps some small moan did escape my lips." "Mad bawbons!" declared the Baron. Then he smiled and winked at his fellow diners. "And tell me, whimpering wad of slime, of what quality dost thou fancy thyself to be, that by contrast all that I am and possess are so low and scorn-worthy?" And he nudged the priest with his elbow and bloated out his cheeks. Then, bravely, did the beggar thrust out his narrow chest, and manfully did lift his face to family and guest, squared his scrawny shoulders, and tightened his behind, and cleared his throat, and took a breath, and set aright his rind. And out spake he with fervor no man would dare to mock, "I am he that once was styled Sir Launcelot du Lac." That's enough for right now, and we'll continue later.